Hey there, everybody. I am joined by Ben from West Michigan Transformers. He has some really great long form Lord of the Rings TCG stuff over there. Highly recommend checking his stuff out. But today we are here to talk about the Two Towers block. And what is the Two Towers block? What's sort of the meta? What are some good strategies? So, this is a video intended kind of for a little bit collectors, but also players that are buying this game that want to figure out what kind of decks they should build, what's a good deck, what's a bad deck, what's a good strategy, etc. Ben, what are your thoughts on the Two Towers?
Yeah. So when we're talking about the Towers block meta, we have to define like what set of cards we're even referring to. Because when you first started out the game and you had the Fellowship block, you had 3 series: Fellowship of the Ring, Mines of Moria, Realms of the Elf Lords, and you just built decks with what you had, and
Yep.
that was all fine. When you get into the Two Towers, story-wise, Decipher had to answer the question of like, do we continue to allow the possibility that characters and events from the first part of the story in this kind of alternate universe that you're making in the game would still appear in like the next part of the story?
Yeah, is
And
Boromir dead? Right?
right, yeah, exactly. So their answer was basically yes. So let's go ahead and you can make your decks using these new cards now from the Two Towers, which is Series 4, Battle of Helm's Deep, Series 5, and Ents of Fangorn, which is Series 6. And that's all Towers block, but you can also include all the cards from the first 3 series together. But that's not all. That's not the only answer. Because if we built sites like an adventure path for the Two Towers from those 4, 5, and 6, it's conceivable that a person could, if they want to, just use the cards from those 3 series. It would still be an accessible, self-consistent game. So that's a format on its own. And then obviously you can still go back and just play with Fellowship block sites and the cards from the Fellowship. Until the Towers came out, those cards were the game. Now they're kind of reflexively defined as, oh, that's just the first part. Okay, so that's now what we call Fellowship block. So there's a lot going on here. If you'd like, I've got a link to this page on the Players Committee Wiki, and it just goes really in depth, all the formats that you can access. But just going through this really quick. So Fellowship block is like Series 1, 2, 3. That's the original state of the game that first year. Towers block, very specifically, depending on your terminology, would be 4, 5, and 6. So that's just using cards from the Two Towers. And then you see these two branch together, Tower Standard. That's where you're using Series 1 through 6. But very specifically, Tower Standard includes Series 1 through 6 with sites on the adventure path from 4 through 6, and including a specific set of cards which you cannot use, what we refer to as the X list. So if you're paying attention to the X list, then you're officially in Tower Standard. These are like the top 40 hits of Fellowship block that just prove too powerful, and Decipher realized for tournament play, the decks were just going to be too similar. They're removing the possibility to go on like off tangent strategies because you just have to keep accounting for these cards. So in order to keep the game balanced, gone is Saruman, Keeper of Isengard, protecting all the Uruk-hai, making them fierce. Gone is Aragorn, heir to the White City, taking away all of your Twilight. Sting, stealing a glance at people's hands and then throwing Twilight out the window. Elrond, just drawing so many cards every turn. So this is what we call the X list, and this is for tournament play, and that's in play for what we call Tower Standard. And last of all, the very last consideration is if you're like at my house, in our neighborhood, in our family player group, and we're not doing, a tournament, you can just run all Series 6 cards, that you want to. So no X list whatsoever.
So one thing, just to jump in here, one thing that's kind of nice about the blocks, I mean, they correspond with a movie, and folks that are playing this just for fun or maybe seeking a more thematic experience, right? You're playing with Towers block 4, 5, 6, you're gonna sort of have that thematic experience of the second movie, right? The Battle of
For
Helm's
sure.
Deep, Uruk-hai, Isengard, etc. So I think that's really nice for new folks. We're gonna go over some strategies. These are gonna be what are really good strategies, but the key to all this is always just enjoy the game, right? Play the game how you want, but you can definitely
Exactly.
play 4, 5, 6 as sort of a self-contained and add in 1, 2, 3 if you want. Um,
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's a really awesome intro, Ben. Do we want to talk about some strategies here and sort of what the decks look like and what folks should do?
Yeah. So in terms of using the word meta, we're talking about what proved to be like really powerful strategies in tournament play. So for that, I'm going to refer specifically to the list of the top 16 decks from Worlds of 2003. That was Tower Standard format, and I've got that listed over here. Um,
Sure.
in those like 16 decks, and we can include a link to this if you'd like, so people can go through this at their leisure. I've tallied it up, and this can give you a good snapshot of at least the free people side. 5 of these 16 decks are based on strongly Rohirrim culture, Eomer, Eowyn, the Riders of Rohan. 3 of them are specifically based around Legolas Dauntless Hunter, so we will talk about him too. There's a couple like Shire, Gondor, Gandalf hybrids. There's an elf deck. There's a dwarf, Entish, Gandalf, Shire deck. There's an Ent Gandalf deck. There's an elf and Gondor deck. Actually, 2 of those. There's an Ent and Rohirrim mashup. So, a few broad conclusions. One, Rohan really proved to be like the number one top of the meta for Free People's Block, at least at this event. And then secondly, the big thing is that otherwise there's a lot of splashing going on and really a lot of different things. Shire, Gondor, Gandalf, and dwarves, elves, like it's just all pooled together. So you can go a lot of different ways. That being said, let's make this narrowly focused. I'm going to go right to the winning deck, which was by Michael Dalton, and his was a Rohirrim based deck focused really specifically around this guy, Eomer. Let me scroll up there, third Marshal of the Rittermark. And his deal is that he gets stronger for each wound on each minion he's skirmishing, which is right in the wheelhouse of what Rohan likes to do, because their core mechanic is to go on to mount the horses, and then horses exert minions during the skirmish phase, like right at the beginning. And so then cards like Eomer spot the wounds on those minions and become stronger for them. So if we look at his deck list just really quick in order, you have Eomer, you have the Elite Rider, who is kind of like a lower powered version of Eomer, again becomes stronger, spotting the wounds. You have Eowyn, who's helping to prevent wounds. And then you have all kinds of Rohirrim upgrade kit, that kind of a thing. So We Left None Alive, Rider's Spear, Eomer's Spear. And then this is interesting. In this deck, there are just 3 mounts. Like we have 1 copy of Firefoot, 1 of Brago, and 1 of Rider's Mount. And this brings us to like what Michael is specifically doing with his site path. So in site 3, you have stables, and this is actually like a later version picture, but the same kind of core concept. You can like pull a horse from the deck at like during the fellowship phase. So this gives him strategic redundancy to be able to pull him out from the deck, put it on Eomer, get that wound machine rolling. And then really interesting, Legolas Greenleaf is a core component of this deck. Almost as a splash companion, but a very important splash companion, such that Site 1 is designed to pull Legolas from the deck. My guess is, Michael can correct us if he's watching. My guess is that during tournament play, he bid kind of low. He was not necessarily relying on going first, but if he went first, he could get Legolas. And in a Rohirrim deck like this, Legolas doesn't have the responsibility anymore of trying to take out minions all on his own. All he really has to do is set up Eomer or the Elite Rider or Rethel for success. He just puts the wounds on the minions, and then the Rohirrim companions capitalize. And then, since we're talking about the Rohirrim culture, some of the other powerful cards in here, we left none alive. When you have an exhausted minion, you can take counters off of this and make a companion strength +2. Rider's Spear gives you a damage bonus for being mounted. Here are those 3 horses. Firefoot is great with Eomer, makes him defender +1. Brago can exert but also heal when you play him. Rider's Mount is just good for going on anyone and being inexpensive. And then we have an Honorable Charge, and we just have a couple copies of that. And there's a very specific reason, I believe, that Michael only included 2 events in the deck, and that gets into the Shadow meta when we get into it. We have the Thundering Host, so make a mountain man, strength +3. And then Symbol Mina, Michael put in 4 copies of this, and that explains in part, I think, why there are only like 3 horses in the deck. So Symbol Mina says spot 2 Rohirrim men or 1
Do you mind just making this full screen, just like this whole thing? Just make it full screen, just a little easier to kind of see. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So I wonder if I can just. Well, it's gonna take a second. Okay, so Symbol Mina, spot 2 men or 1 valiant man to play a Rohirrim character or a Rohirrim possession from your draw deck. This makes the deck super, super efficient, and this is one of the power cards in the Rohirrim culture, why it's kind of at the top of the meta, because it lets you pick whatever you want in a given moment. You can look at your hand, see what you already have, and then respond in kind with, okay, what do I need next? And with 4 copies, you play it, it's out of your hand, it helps you reconcile later, but also it's pulling free people's cards out of your deck, which is going to end up making your shadow side more efficient, because there are fewer free people's cards in a deck. But of course, the big draw to Symbol Mina is just being able to pull whatever card you want, the card that you want the most. So putting in 4 copies was just a huge bonus, and I think it helped his deck go really well. One last note on this deck and on Rohirrim culture. A small component of Rohirrim culture is villager support. We see Leod here, and I love these sort of Beowulf names. Hlafwine. Exert Hlafwine to make a Rohirrim man strength +2. Exert Leod to make a mounted companion strength +2. And we had those, Thundering Hosts. We left none alive. Rohirrim cards have a lot of access to strength bonuses that aren't tied up in skirmish events, and that's one of their core strengths in a meta which doesn't like skirmish events for a very specific reason. Yeah, okay, so I will say as the last note on Rohirrim companions in general, the Rohirrim culture, it is powerful, it is also very complicated. So it's not like a point and click kind of strategy. It takes, in my experience anyways, a lot of trial and error to figure out the right balance and which cards are the good cards and which cards are kind of the red herrings. But Decipher totally put out a lot of stuff for Rohan in the Towers block. So there's a lot to explore there. Also, you had mentioned just before we started talking about the Free People side, on the note of the series that are included, you can see in this deck like Frying Pan, which is from block 3. So in this tournament setting, again, we have like series 1 through 6 all available. It's just all those X list cards, those super powerful cards, are like banned, not allowed, not a thing. Okay, moving on, if that seems good.
Yeah, that sounds great.
A Legolas Dauntless Hunter deck over here. This is by Casey Barson. So, Dauntless Hunter's deal. The Twilight cost of each shadow event and shadow condition is +1 for each unbound hobbit you can spot. In the time of the Towers block, there are 2 unbound hobbits that Merry and Pippin. And so if you have Merry and Pippin out there alive, then Legolas can make shadow events like skirmish events, and then shadow conditions cost +2. So this is like a control strategy. You're making things really expensive on your opponent. And then obviously we need the hobbits. So Casey went with Pippin, Hobbit of some intelligence, and then Merry friend to Sam, who can chip in and help skirmish events. And then plenty of Hobbit support. So stealth events. Oh, there's that frying pan again. Mithril coat, build a pony, there and back again, town for not being seen. So a lot of this is like fellowship block stuff making an appearance again. So Shire culture was really well set up for that kind of sneaking around to begin with. Legolas provides just a little bit more edge because he makes things like super expensive. And then one more thing, you see fearing the worst in this deck. The Twilight cost of each search card and each tracker is +2. So you add that on top of the Legolas, and if you're running into just the right deck, you're making things cost +4, which is prohibitive. Yeah. So Legolas Dauntless Hunter was a big splash in the Towers meta, certainly at this event. And then let's find who. Yeah, okay. So Robert, I'm sorry if I mispronounced this, Shiremeyer, his I have a bad feeling about this deck. So he doesn't have a bad feeling about the deck, mind you. No, okay, that was the title. So this is clearly a Gandalf-centric kind of a deck. You can see like Gandalf Staff, Shadowfax, Galamdring. Down here, Trust Me As You Once Did, 2 copies, 4 of Mysterious Wizard, Servant of the Secret Fire, Grown Suddenly Tall, and then 4 copies of Gandalf with also another copy of A Wizard Is Never Late, just to make sure that we get Gandalf out there. I bring this up. In the Towers, it's really interesting. The attitude about Gandalf and really about Free People's Cultures shifts from the thematic fellowship block strategy of like sneaking around, trying to be doing the quest in secrecy. And now in the Towers, you're like boldly putting Twilight out there. Gandalf the White Wizard, while you can spot 3 Twilight tokens, Gandalf is strength +3. You want to put Twilight out there. You're trying to deliberately. So then 2, Glandring Lightning Brand. Each time you play a spell during a skirmish, you may make Gandalf damage +1. You're trying to put cards out there. And then Gandalf Staff, while you can spot 2 Twilight tokens, Gandalf is damage +2. So the Gandalf strategy is like trying to pour Twilight, trying to put it out there. So Mysterious Wizard puts 2. Look at this. Here's a card with 5 Twilight. Spot Gandalf to discard all conditions. So yeah, Gandalf the Gray, sneaky, trying to reduce Twilight. Gandalf the White, really trying to be expensive and say, okay, what does the Shadow have? What are you going to do? And I really love that thematically. For me, it's a lot more fun. It tells you to throw aside some of the like control inhibitions that you want to use and instead like go full bore. Yeah. And then just sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Keep going. I'm listening. It's fun to hear you go through this stuff, like in a very mechanical way. So please go ahead.
There are a few end decks in here. Let's find.
That sounds fun. An end deck sounds very fun.
Yes. I mentioned that Rohan is complicated. Ents are even more so. But I love them. So the thing about Ents, like you look at Linden Root, he's got a strength of 10, vitality 4. That's awesome, right? Treebeard's got strength 12, vitality 4. You could find Quick Beam, he's got 8-3, but he's Twilight cost -1 for each Unbound Hobbit. So he's like Aragorn's strength, while you can also include Merry and Pippin in your starting fellowship. So the Ents are like big stats, and that makes them like really, really compelling as an idea to pursue. What makes them so hard is so much of their support cards are specifically dependent on the Unbound Hobbits to like play what you're looking for. Um, it looks like this deck, um, blended with Dwarf support and Shire support, really gets around trying to do a lot of Ent support. But even looking at like Forest Guardian, you see already exert an Unbound Hobbit or discard 2 cards from hand to allow this companion to skirmish. So like you need Merry and Pippin out there to help, or you have to be willing to discard cards out of your hand, which isn't always hard. But I mean, there are so many other Ent cards that, like Ent Moot, you have to exert to play it to give a static +2 bonus to an Ent. Boomed and Trumpeted spot X Unbound Hobbits to make an Ent strength +2. I mean, strength +X, damage +X. There's a companion Treebeard eventually. I'm just gonna go find him a second because he is cool. And dun, 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 dun.
And while you look for that, I'm just going to say that this is, I'll leave a link to this, but this is the wiki for the game, and it is immensely helpful. It is free. It is just a great resource. So folks that are like, what are the cards? How do I find it? Like, there's this huge wiki where the Players Council has put together a ton of work to put this together. So highly recommend.
So here's what I'm looking for.
Wiki.
Yeah, and this is their updated version, the Players Committee Wiki. So it's having new features. So Treebeard, Guardian of the Forest, he's a companion, so you don't have to rely on him being in your support area. But assignment, there's no way to get around this. Exert an Unbound Hobbit to allow Treebeard to skirmish. Like, period. So if you want to call on that fantastic 12 strength to go fight the Witch King, you have to have Merry and Pippin, and they have to exert, like, to throw him out there. So it's almost like Merry and Pippin lose the skirmish every time you send an Ent out. Ents are not impossible. There are really cool things you can do. Just know that you want to look for as many of the support cards as you can that don't cost the Unbound Hobbits their vitality. And secondly, you want ways to refresh the vitality of the Unbound Hobbits for the sake of all the exerting that they're doing. So lots of fun, but really complicated. Lots of trial and error to go through. A few more thoughts. So Gondor's power is beginning to grow in the Towers block. I'm going to pull this up a second. Give me... Okay.
Oh, wrong one.
Okay. I'm going to make this full screen. Yeah, that's
Yep.
better. Okay. So with Gondor, you're definitely finally getting into monoculture support. Yeah. This is in the way.
Maybe
There we go.
Yeah,
Okay.
there we go.
So in Fellowship Block, you just had Boromir and Aragorn, and they were fantastic. But you couldn't just run them like as a Gondor culture. The closest thing, I suppose, was like turning your hobbits into surrogate Gondor warriors with like Dagger Strike and there and back again. But I mean, that was iffy. I love it, but it's iffy. Then there's finally in the Two Towers the story of Faramir and the Rangers of Ithilien. So these guys have like this wounding mechanic where Gondorian Ranger sets up minions to be roaming during the skirmish phase, and then you can just get like free shots on minions. So exert Faramir to wound a roaming minion he's fighting. Ranger's Bow does the same thing. You can put it on any ranger you want to. Defend it and hope. You can wound minions during a maneuver phase. Arrows thick in the air. You can exert 2 ringbound men to wound each roaming minion. So there's a kind of like skirmish phase archery thing going on, which is really, really cool. And then you can also just go the buff route. So give your rangers swords, and then if you spot roaming minions via the Gondorian Ranger, you can make them strength +3 and damage +1. You can call back to Swordsmen of the Northern Kingdom, make them strength +4. So like there's a lot of ways you can go for Gondor. Okay, 2 final thoughts on Free People's Block in the meta. I'm going to take a step back from Worlds and just talk about my own home experience here. The most dominant deck to have ever entered our little family neighborhood meta was my brother's Aragorn and the Disappearing Hobbits deck. And I had not the exact list that he had, but very similar pulled up here. Okay, so here's how this worked. And I mean, we were just our neighborhood, but this deck went like 16-0 before we finally caught up to it. So um, it relies on principally Merry Learned Guide, who can exert Frodo to disappear during the skirmish phase, and then Pippin can add a burden to do the same. Now, your opponent can remove 2 to prevent that, but then you can just do it again, add another burden to Frodo, or exert Frodo again. So you keep seeing your opponent remove Twilight, and eventually they can't do it anymore. Then if you want to troll them, you can say, oh, I didn't need it anyways, and I'll just play Warmed Up a bit and discard an Unbound Hobbit with this event. Or you can watch all the Twilight disappear out of the pool and then play a Skirmish Canceller, swiftly and softly. Or you can put Escape on Merry and Pippin, and you've made them remove all the Twilight, and then you double click with Merry or Pippin, exert them twice, and there's no Twilight left for your opponent to remove 1 to prevent the prevention of the skirmish anymore. And then, having done all of that, you have redundant copies of Merry and Pippin in the deck, so you can play them on the next, Fellowship phase. Or you can use Knocked on the Head to play an Unbound Hobbit from your discard pile. Now, the problem, that's great, that's trollish, it's sneaky, it's like fighting thin air. The problem is you're not killing any minions that way. So this is where Aragorn and Smeagol come in. You have already Smeagol and Sam, along with Frodo, Merry, and Pippin, in the starting Fellowship. Because you have Sam, who can get rid of burdens, you bid high, and then you play down, I'm forgetting the Towers version, which can pull Aragorn, but you exert 2 Unbound Companions, Merry and Pippin, because they're going to disappear, and all their wounds will go with them. You pull Aragorn from the deck, and then Aragorn, each time the Fellowship moves, you may wound a minion for each Unbound Hobbit you can spot. So the machine is, give Aragorn a sword and or a bow, let him, chip in during the archery phase. During the skirmish phase, assign a weak minion to him, like someone way beneath his dignity, and let him just stomp on them, stomp, stomp, stomp. Take Merry and Pippin, send them against the Cave Troll and the Uruk-hai rear guard and such. Make them disappear, play the stealth events, like absolutely troll your opponent. Okay, during the regroup phase, play Knocked on the Head, bring Merry and or Pippin back from the discard pile, exert Smeagol twice, look at the top 4 cards of your deck, wound a minion for each shadow card. That's a lot. Hopefully it's a lot. And then Aragorn gets hopefully 2 like automatic wounds. So during the regroup phase, you're just clearing house. You're just sending everyone away. It's absolutely rude. Yeah. Then you can also include some other further Shire support. Hobbit Sword, there and back again, and Bounder. Okay, so there's an example. My one last thought on all of this is the pool available for Tower Standard, like 1 through 6, but there's an X list. That's more than 1,000 cards available to you from Series 1 and 6. So I would humbly suggest that the meta we can observe from the top 16 deck lists is one clear snapshot of fine deck building in Tower's block. So you can use that exploration. You can look through the cards yourself and go for what thematically makes you happy, like the way you like telling the story. And you're going to find, if you work at it, still some very promising competitive results. And they might not be represented in the deck list we look at. So you got the Ringbound Rangers, you have Helm's Deep Elves, you have the Ents, you have Knights who show up in Series 5 and 6, or at least Series 5. There's Dwarven Condition Manipulation. There's even kind of Ninja Smeagol. So there's just a whole bunch to explore there. And I think I have remembered one more thing I was going to look at. The Elves. Okay, 30 seconds. Helm's Deep Elves have a kind of inverted Rohirrim mechanic. So in Rohan, you put on the mounts. The mounts exert during the skirmish phase, put the wounds on the minions. The Helm's Deep elves, of course, rely on archery from Legolas and Elven Bow to put out wounds during the archery phase. And then you have companions like the Lorien Swordsman and events like Feathered, conditions like Blades Drawn, which make minions weaker and weaker for each wound on them. So the Helm's Deep elves rely on wounds, and then having wounded people during the archery phase, hopefully all you need is one more wound during skirmish phase just by winning to like poke them and make them fall over. So Helm's Deep elves are a lot of fun too. There was one little there's another sub strategy with the Nath characters who specifically don't add to the archery total, and they use the Nath longbow, which is like a ranged weapon that gives you +1. They have some interesting abilities. It's kind of a different subset. Anyways, the whole point in all of this is so much to explore. Like, go for what makes you happy, enjoy it, and there's a good chance that if you keep poking at it, you're going to find something that is thematically cohesive, something you really enjoy, and it also still works really, really well. Yeah. So there's the free people side.
Yeah. So let's maybe pause there for a second, because I think that maybe we'll just do another video with the shadow people side, because I think this is already a lot that we've unpacked here. So, I mean, I will also just note that from an accessibility standpoint, 2 towers, for whatever reason, is still pretty affordable. Like, you can get a starter deck for like $4 or $5, and
awesome.
You know, packs are $3 to $4 for 2 towers, and so this is a pretty accessible. I just bought a 2 towers sealed booster box for $80, right? Which I think is basically MSRP 20 years ago, right?
And so, I think you can still find pretty accessibly, like Decipher must have printed a bunch of them, the towers draft packs. So if you want to, like, even if you've already got a lot in the game, and if you don't, you can go get those draft packs and do like sealed events with your friends. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree. So I just want to note that, because I think that this game is getting increasingly expensive as it's been farther and farther out of print. But there are cheap and affordable ways of playing this, whether you want to play sealed or draw off a pool. I think towers is a pretty affordable way to do it. So just making that note. So Ben, thank you so much for the preview or the overview of the free people side. We'll be back with part 2 to cover the shadows side, so make it kind of a 2-part series. But everybody, thanks for tuning in, and we'll do a second part in a week or so.
Thanks so much.
All right. See ya.
See ya.